Story of how I went to the detention and was shocked by who I met there. Being a deputy sheriff was something I always took pride in. My career had been on a steady rise, and I had the full trust of my superiors. Everyone at the precinct knew I wasn't the kind to cut corners or take shortcuts. If a job needed doing, I was the first to step up. From drug busts to calming domestic disputes, I handled it all with the same level of responsibility. At home, things were a little different. My work hours were crazy, leaving me scarce around the house, and that meant my wife, Lucy, often had to pick up the slack. Lucy worked as a nurse in a private hospital, and her night shifts could be brutal. My mother, bless her soul, was our saving grace. She practically raised our son, Max. It felt like Mom was always there for Max when Lucy and I couldn't be. Max was 8 years old, and already showing signs of becoming a handful, talking back, staying glued to video games, and trying out all the classic excuses to avoid homework. But even with his rebellious streak, he was a good kid. Mom, though, had him wrapped around her little finger. Whenever I heard them in the kitchen, it always seemed like they were planning some kind of mini heist on the cookie jar. Everything seemed normal. Just another day in the life of a cop with a family that was holding itself together with my mother as the glue. But little did I know, the events that would soon unfold would tear through the fabric of our lives. It was a Tuesday evening, and I had just gotten home from a particularly uneventful shift. The kind of shift that makes you thankful for the mundane. No major arrests, no brawls, no chases, just peace. Lucy was at the hospital for a night shift, and Mom was in the living room, watching her favorite soap opera while keeping one eye on Max, who was running around like he had too much sugar again. I was about to settle into the recliner, dreaming about an hour or two of peace when my phone buzzed on the coffee table. "Deputy, we need you." Now, came the gruff voice of Sergeant Hendricks, my boss. "What's going on, Sarge?" I asked, already knowing that if Hendricks was calling, it wasn't for a routine check. "Feds are raiding a drug den on the east side. It's turning ugly. Armed suspects inside, heavy resistance. They're asking for state assistance. We need boots on the ground immediately." I stood up, shaking my head. "I'm on my way," I said, feeling the familiar jolt of adrenaline kicking in. I kissed my mother on the cheek, gave Max a quick pat on the head, and headed out the door. Another raid. Another dangerous night. But that was the job, right? Keep the city safe. I had done it a million times before. Only, this time, I couldn't shake the strange feeling that something was off. When I arrived at the scene, it was straight out of a movie. The whole block was cordoned off, flashing red and blue lights bouncing off the buildings. Dozens of police cars formed a perimeter, and the sound of sporadic gunfire echoed in the night. The drug den was an old, crumbling apartment building that looked like it hadn't seen a renovation in decades. Inside, the situation was as volatile as it get. I could see FBI agents hunched behind their vehicles, firing at the windows. The smell of gunpowder filled the air as rounds pinged off cars and walls. "We got hostiles on the 3rd floor. They're heavily armed," one of the feds yelled as I jogged over to where they were stationed. This wasn't the kind of operation I was used to. Most of my cases involved smaller-time dealers and local hoods. But this was next level. A full-blown drug ring, with all the violence and chaos that came with it. "We've got shooters in every direction," one of the agents briefed me quickly, ducking behind a squad car as bullets whizzed past. "They've fortified themselves inside, and they're not planning on going down quietly. We need to outflank them." I nodded. As a deputy, I knew the layout of the town better than anyone. I had patrolled these streets for years, and I knew this block like the back of my hand. I scanned the building, looking for an angle we could exploit. "There's an adjacent building," I said, pointing. "It's old, but if we can get through it, we might be able to sneak in from the back, catch them off guard." The lead agent looked skeptical but didn't have a better plan. "Let's do it. Take a couple of your guys and head in." So, with 2 other officers in tow, we set off. We moved quickly, ducking low to avoid gunfire. My heart pounded, but it wasn't just because of the danger. There was something gnawing at the back of my mind, a nagging feeling I couldn't shake, but I pushed it aside. Focus on the job, I told myself. We made it inside the adjacent building without incident. It was dark, musty, and eerily quiet compared to the chaos outside. We crept through the halls, carefully making our way up to the second floor, which was level with the drug house. From here, we could hear the muffled sounds of gunfire and shouting through the walls. As we moved toward what seemed to be an old office space, I motioned for my team to stop. I could hear someone moving behind a door to my left. I signaled to one of the officers to cover me as I slowly pushed it open. What I saw next made my blood run cold. Inside the room were half a dozen women, huddled together in fear. They were scantily dressed, their faces pale and hollow. It didn't take long to understand what kind of operation this was. The drug den was also doubling as a brothel, and these women were clearly part of that trade. But that wasn't the shocking part. In the corner of the room, sitting on an old, worn-out couch, was my wife, Lucy. I froze, the door half open, unable to process what I was seeing. Lucy was dressed in plain clothes, her hair disheveled. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with panic, as though she had been caught in the act. "Lucy," I croaked, my voice barely a whisper. She stood up abruptly, her face pale. The other women didn't seem to know what was going on, but they all looked at me as if I were some kind of intruder, a stranger in their world. My mind raced with questions. What was she doing here? Why was she here, in a room with these women, in the middle of a drug bust? The officer behind me stepped forward, breaking the silence. "Deputy, what?" "Wait outside," I said quickly, cutting him off. I needed a moment to think, to breathe, to understand what was happening. The officer hesitated but eventually stepped back, leaving Lucy and me alone in the room. "What the hell are you doing here?" I demanded, my voice louder than I intended. Lucy opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out. She looked scared, more scared than I'd ever seen her, but I couldn't tell if it was because of the situation or because she had been caught. I can explain," she finally said, her voice shaky. "Explain?" I nearly shouted, but I kept my voice low, knowing full well the danger outside. "You're supposed to be on your night shift at the hospital. How do you end up here? With them?" I gestured toward the women who were all watching us with wide eyes. Lucy bit her lip, her hands trembling as she wrung them together. The silence between us stretched on, thick with tension. "I got in over my head," she whispered finally. "I wasn't here for that. I swear. I was helping these women." "What do you mean helping?" I asked, my voice full of disbelief. "Lucy, this is a brothel. These women are involved with a drug ring, and you just happen to be here." She shook her head, the tears welling up in her eyes. "No, it's not like that. I've been helping these women get out. Some of them come to the hospital, and they confide in me. They tell me things, horrible things. I was trying to help them escape this life." I stared at her, not sure whether to believe her or not. The woman standing before me was my wife, the mother of my son, but now she felt like a stranger, wrapped up in a world I didn't understand. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, my voice softening. "I could have helped. I'm a cop, Lucy. This is what I do." She took a step closer, her eyes pleading. "I couldn't, not without risking everything. These men are dangerous, Adam. If they knew I was helping, they would have come after me, or after Max. I thought I was protecting you." "Protecting me?" The words felt heavy and hollow. This whole time, she had been living a double life, keeping secrets that put her in danger. And for what? To help these women? Who else knows about this? I asked, running a hand through my hair. The gravity of the situation was sinking in. "Only one person," she said. "A man named Javier. He's been helping me get information on the ring. He's undercover." "Javier? You mean the guy from narcotics?" I recognized the name immediately. I had worked with him a few times. He was good, too good, sometimes. The kind of guy who got lost in the job. "Yes," she said. "But things got messy. That's why I'm here." I was supposed to meet him tonight, but before she could finish, there was a knock on the door. One of the officers poked his head in. Deputy, we need you outside. They've called in SWAT. I looked at Lucy, torn between my duty and this sudden, life-altering revelation. Stay here, I said. We'll talk when this is over. She nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. But as I turned to leave, the door swung open again, this time with more force, and there stood Javier, a smirk on his face. Well, look at this cozy little scene, Javier said, crossing his arms over his chest. There was something unsettling about his tone. I couldn't quite place it, but the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. Javier, what are you doing here? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He shrugged casually. Thought I'd check on Lucy. See how things are going. I glanced at my wife, whose face had gone pale. Something was wrong. Very wrong. You didn't tell him, did you? Javier asked, his smirk widening as he stepped closer to Lucy. You didn't tell him that this whole operation was my idea. My heart dropped. What are you talking about? Javier looked at Lucy, then back at me. Your wife here. She didn't just stumble into this mess. She's been working with me for over a year. She's been the key to everything. She knows the ins and outs of this operation better than anyone. I turned to Lucy, my mind racing. Is this true? Her eyes filled with tears again, and she nodded slowly. It's true, but I didn't know how deep it went. Javier promised he could protect us. He said this was the only way to take them down. And you believed him? I asked, incredulous. You risked everything for this? Before she could answer, Javier's smile faded, replaced by a look of cold indifference. The thing is, Deputy, I've been playing both sides. This little operation? It's mine now. And your wife? She's been helping me build it. I took a step back, my mind spinning. Lucy had been working with Javier, and now Javier was revealing himself as the true puppet master behind the entire drug ring. You're in way over your head, Javier, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. The feds are out there. SWAT is coming. You think you can just walk out of here? He laughed, shaking his head. You don't get it, do you? I've already got my way out. And if you don't want to end up in a body bag, I suggest you back off. I reached for my gun, but before I could react, Lucy stepped between us. Adam, please, she begged. Don't do this. There's more to this than you know. My heart ached. I didn't know who to trust anymore. Was Lucy still my wife? Or had she become part of Javier's twisted plan? But before I could make a decision, a loud explosion rocked the building. The walls shook and the windows shattered. SWAT had arrived, and they were coming in hot. In the chaos, Javier made a run for it. I chased after him, my mind racing, but he was too fast. By the time I got outside, he had disappeared into the night. The raid was over, and the drug ring was dismantled, but Javier was gone. Lucy was taken into custody for questioning, and I was left standing in the wreckage of my life, unsure of what to do next. In the days that followed, I learned that Lucy had been trying to help those women, but she had gotten too close to Javier. She had been manipulated, used, and ultimately betrayed, just like I had been. I didn't know if our marriage could survive this, but one thing was certain. The man I thought I was, the deputy sheriff with a perfect family, was gone. In his place was a man who had been broken but wasn't about to give up. As I sat in my now empty home, I thought about Max, about the future, and about the long road ahead. And I realized, sometimes the people you love the most can also be the ones who break you the hardest. But no matter how many times life knocks you down, you get back up. And I wasn't done fighting yet.